Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Atlas Loom, an exploration of world building for tabletop and beyond. My name is Endeavorance, and with me, as always, is a woman who just finished cleaning her whole apartment using nothing but her toothbrush, Diana of the Rose. How'd that go?
Well, emphasis on my toothbrush. It wasn't a spare toothbrush. I just used mine.
I
Uh,
mean, it adds some flavor. You gotta get
it
the
does.
pumice in the bristles, if you want to have the whitest teeth.
Oh, I always forget pumice is a word. What a horrible
Pumice.
word.
I just got a new bar of
Oh,
soap that's got pumice as a listed ingredient.
ugh. I don't know. I don't like that word.
Exfoliating. What, you don't like exfoliation?
I don't like a word that sounds like a mix between pus and hummus. I
Oh, well,
that's my
fuck.
beef
You
with
just
it.
ruined pumice for me.
Yeah,
You ruined
yeah, that's
hummus for
right.
me.
Anyway,
No.
welcome back to our world building podcast. If you build a world, make sure pumice doesn't exist, please.
You just took hummus away from me.
You're
You
welcome.
just took you took the entire concept of hummus.
Yeah, get fucked.
I gotta go throw a few things away. Hold on.
Endeavor's messaged me yesterday, or like the day before, and he's like, "Hey, what are we doing this next episode on?" And he spat out like three different options, all of which are incredibly difficult for someone like me to conceptualize. And so I chose tone and vibes, and that's what we're going off of today. I will admit right off the bat, I did not come up with like a bullet point list of things to talk about. I felt like it was appropriate to have no plan, just vibes for the vibe
Just
episode.
leave it up to the vibes. But what about the
Yeah.
tones?
I mean, like coolish sort of undertones, maybe. I think
What
I'm
about
cool.
overtones?
Oh shit. Purely sexual overtones.
Mm-hmm.
That's yeah.
Welcome back to the Atlas Lim. Tone. Tone and vibes. Arguably one of the most important parts of your world, and also arguably one of the most difficult to verbalize and nail down.
It's so easy to fuck up.
Mm-hmm.
So easy, and it'll throw off your entire world's balance if you do.
Not to mention that there is the choice of what is the tone of your world? What's the general atmosphere, the vibe? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it hopeful? Is it pessimistic? And then the story that you're telling within that world, because the world itself has its own sort of feeling. The stories you want to tell have story beats that require certain feelings to be evoked. Do those feelings match the world that you have made? Do they go against it? Should they go against it? Or should they work with it? That's what we're going to talk about today.
The tone is really ingrained into everything that you do in your world, every little bit of it. And it's kind of one of the first things that you need to think about. For instance, an academic tone, right? It doesn't even have to be an academic storyline that you're trying to tell, but just like the setting of it, everything has to contribute to that. So, if we have a magic school type vibe, very common, very fun. Every little detail of your world is going to contribute to that. The school itself, the building, might be made of a certain rock type, like marble, that exudes an air of opulence. It might have gold filigree on all of the robes that the professors wear, something that says, "Hey, I have high status." There might be giant gates leading onto the property of that school. There is going to be the chatter of students in the air, just like constantly surrounding whoever your POV character is. Um, Everything that happens is going to contribute to that. And it would be very out of place to have something not contribute to that. Like if you had this academic vibe in the world and then all of a sudden, the fucking skies are overcast and, thundery and there's lightning striking down, that kind of conflicts with the fresh spring air, college student type atmosphere that you've built up to that point. So that's like kind of, I guess, just one general example of how every little detail has to contribute to your overarching theme.
Absolutely. I think that's a great example. And I really want to dial in throughout this entire episode on the way that you immediately went to what do you see?
Hmm?
Because one of the biggest things with tone and conveying tone, vibes, whatever you want to call it, I'm just going to go back and forth between the two so I don't just say tone a million times this episode. When you're trying to convey the vibes, show, don't tell is always better.
Huge.
Every single time. Walking into a building and giving all of the details that allow your players, your reader, your whoever to come to their own conclusion is so much more powerful because they have now put together all the pieces in their head that you have provided and then constructed their imagination of the scenario that they find themselves in, which they're then able to hold on to and will probably remember better in the future, rather than you walk into a room, it's tense. That's why is it tense? I don't know what that means. But if
Yeah.
you walk into a room and there are two people already like holding us, like one's holding a sword to the other one's neck already, with a person off to the side who's visibly shaken, and somebody who has like dropped something and won't even go move to pick it up, or everyone's frozen in place because the slightest movement could end someone's life. That's much better than saying
That's amazing.
this is tense.
Hmm.
Going as far as to explain like there is a sense of nobility or status around the professors with the gold filigree on their capes. I loved that.
I just like the word filigree, honestly.
Filigree is a great word. It's really good. Going back a little bit though to choosing your world's tone and vibe, it's probably not going to be the first thing you think of. It may be. I have done that in the past where I think 2018 was like a record-setting year for rain where I lived, and it was causing flooding issues. It was just constantly raining. It was overcast nonstop. Every day was just miserable for months.
Seattle.
Not
Yeah.
not Seattle. Still not in Seattle. Still, last time it was the gum wall. Now we're
Listen,
talking about the weather.
I have a hatred of Seattle purely based off of the gum wall and the weather alone. We've hit the 2 points that I wanted to hit on this podcast.
The big ones, really. But I took the vibe that I was feeling from all that rain, which was depression, and I used that as inspiration for a game project. I made a world that was in an endless rainstorm, and it wasn't about the rain necessarily. It was like a magic storm that was causing a resurgence of monsters or whatever. But the oppressive nature of that weather inspired me to make a world that was specifically oppressive in nature. Literally in nature. It wasn't oppressive from political systems. It was oppressive from, this is a hostile environment now. And more so, it wasn't a hostile environment before, and then something happened, and now it sucks, and we're dealing with it sucking, because that's what I went through. I went through like, oh, this is, normal weather. It's time for summer. Nope. You don't see the sun. You don't get the sun. But from there, you've got your initial tone and you're starting to build out your world. Maybe you started to build your world with some random thing, and then you decided like, you know what? I want to make this gothic. I want to make this futuristic but optimistic rather than cyberpunk and pessimistic or whatever. But whatever you land on, you can go in two different directions. One, you can stick with that. You can stay in your lane more or less, and you're going to have a pretty good time keeping everything sensible. But if there's anything about this podcast that we know, at least about me, is sensible does not matter to me. I don't
know what sensible
do.
means.
I've never been sensible in my life. But you can start with a given tone and then turn it on its head. And there's a few ways that you can do this that actually contribute positively to the story rather than causing whiplash. For example, let's say that you set out to make a world that is overtly over the top fantasy, super bubbly, fairies and magic and happy and rainbows and shit. But then you roll an extremely dark campaign, or you tell just a really dark story, or underneath the surface of this town, or of this world rather, is a terrible secret. Maybe this is not real. Maybe this fanciful world that everyone is seeing is a shared hallucination, because the world that actually exists is so destroyed and horrific that the only way for people to maintain their sanity is to collectively buy in essentially to the Matrix. And that lets you just completely subvert and juxtapose this happy-go-lucky tone with a bleak, horrifying tone.
Oh yeah, you can't just have like full-on horror the entire way through. There's no stakes if you do that. Like, Curse of Strahd, for instance, and I'm going to keep going back to Curse of Strahd because it's the only thing that I've been playing recently. It's a dismal world. It's constantly overcast. The people dress in drab clothing, but there are some key characters in the game who have colorful clothing. They have smiles on their faces where normally villagers in Barovia do not in the slightest. There are people who have hope. There's someone out there making toys for children, and the children are out playing with these toys in the streets. And their parents were dressed in like just grays and purples and have absolutely no expressions on their face. They're just watching off to the side, and it makes it not necessarily realistic, but it gives real vibes. It puts stakes out there and makes it feel a little bit more serious. That being said, the specific story beats too, when you make that switch, oh my god, that can be so powerful. Like, I've got a friend right now who's running a game who the players couldn't decide if they wanted like a magical school type game or a horror type game. So he's running it so that it starts off as a magical school, very idealistic, very optimistic. People are just going about their day, settling themselves into their classes and establishing themselves in the social circles of this school. And then all of a sudden, everything's going to go to shit. Some dinner is going to get interrupted by the most horrifying attack, zombies, torture, some sort of like dismal,
spoilers,
abrupt shift. He didn't tell me any of that. That's just what I would do. If it were me ruining your campaign, here's how it would look. And so that sort of tone shift lends massively to the experience of your players. That's the type of stuff that people will never forget, is like that moment.
Absolutely. It's so much bigger than you meet the big bad evil guy and he's the big bad evil guy. Yeah. You've made it to the evil lair after adventuring towards the evil lair to kill the evil guy who was doing the evil things to the town that didn't want evil things happening to them. And then you meet the guy and he's like, hello, I'm evil. And then you kill him and that's the end of the campaign. Like,
too predictable. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just like, that's stagnant. It doesn't give you that moment of, I have been flipped on my head. I, as the player or as the reader or the viewer or whatever, cannot deal. Like, I, the actual person, am feeling the emotional effects of what just happened. And that is what is going to drive the most incredible character development and memorable moments, as Diana said. That is the kind of thing that people will then go to a nerd party and be like, this one time my DM did blah. And like, you want to be that one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I plan out my campaigns, with a tone in mind from the outset, because again, this should be a foundational part of what you're planning. What I do then is I go to fucking Pinterest, dude, to come up with like the set pieces, the actual visuals, which will contribute more heavily to your tone than almost anything else. Straight up, I will go to Pinterest and be like, I want a dark academia campaign. Just search dark academia and look at the pretty pictures, look at the outfits, look at the dark hallways of these opulent sort of like buildings with very tall curved roofs, things that you wouldn't even think of, right? But that are common to this theme. If I wanted a horror setting, it would be a lot of like views from inside a building out a window at a cloudy sky. I keep going back to cloudy skies, man.
You all right? You need to.
Today was the first cloudy day in Bend in like fucking forever, and I guess it's hitting hard. Because again, we don't have cloudy days here. You should know that, by the way.
Yeah.
Going back to the academic vibe, stacks of books, candles, long wooden tables, that sort of thing. That'll do most of the work for you, honestly. So that's kind of where I start. I also recommend listening to music, atmospheric sort of like instrumentals that give the vibe of what you're thinking. If you're going for a very adventure heavy sort of like standard D&D style, like discovering yourself, adventuring out into the wilderness and defeating monsters sort of vibe, you can find playlists for that on Spotify. Throw that on in the background while you world build, and that'll guide you in subconscious ways that will help you a fuck ton. That's what I do. That's what I recommend. It's very similar to how people build characters. I mean, especially for people who are going really hard into their character backstory and things like that. Like, the real pros will make Pinterest boards and make Spotify playlists for their characters. And that, like, just helps them set the tone for their character. So take that. Do it for your world.
Making a note for myself. You're
Do you
not a
not do
real
this?
pro. You're pretty bad at this. Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Mhm.
I've not made a playlist for my characters. So
For Lua. For Lua, it would just be silence.
Wait, no, but that's so good. There's that what is it, 444, I think? Hold on.
Sorry.
Gerard, I need you to look
Gerard.
something up for me. 433. Thanks, Gerard.
Is that like an area code?
Oh, good. Yes, there's Wikipedia even has the audio of this wonderful song. So if you look up
What?
4 minutes and 33 seconds, so like 4'33" quote, um, it is a song that is 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. It is a literal orchestration,
What?
and it is 4 minutes and 33 seconds of uh what the hell what's the oh my god, what's the note called that's just a pause? Is it pause?
A
Rest. It's a rest.
rest?
It's entirely rests. That's what it is. God.
Jesus. I love how it says that it's composed in 1952 for any instrument or combination of instruments.
It doesn't matter. What instrument do you play? You can play this. Congratulations, you're now a musician. I love that there's actually a playable file that
Yeah,
is
it's
4 minutes
embedded
and
in.
33 seconds of
Oh, man.
nothing. It's also on YouTube. You can go listen to it on YouTube if you want. For context, my character Lua is a character in Diana's campaign. He cannot speak. And so if he had a playlist, it would probably just be that. It would be,
On
oh,
repeat.
actually, no, it would be that followed by that song once, followed by like 40 copies of Turn Down for What. I think that's it, actually.
That really fits his vibe perfectly. Yeah. Uh-huh. Very goodness.
So let's talk about, okay, so you said looking up pictures and using that as your inspo, like get your tone, look that
Get a
up
mood
on
board.
get
Like,
a
that's what mood boards
board
are
going.
for.
Hell yeah. I like to ask questions with the context of the tone or the goal of where I'm trying to move towards with a given scene. So I will say, okay, I want this area or this sequence or this scene to be foreboding. I want it to feel ominous. I want it to feel dangerous. And I know I want to have these major set pieces.
Uh-huh.
What alterations or details in these set pieces can I add to get me closer to that feeling? And one example of taking an existing like set piece and trying to add more ominousness, more of the vibe you're going for in whatever direction. I had essentially a large area that was entirely like just a few inches of water instead of just like ground. It was just a few inches of water, and there was a massive tree in the middle of a big clearing. It was housing a giant sloth, which was like a big kind of scary creature. It was sort of a don't wake up this giant sleeping sloth monster, but you need to get something from this tree. And so it was supposed to give a sense of, you hear, before you even get there, you're hearing, it's a massive, massive creature. And so you're hearing its breathing. It's asleep. And you're hearing from before you even have visual of it, you just hear what sounds like aggressive wind and some sort of a low rumble. And that in and of itself, in a spooky, sort of like misty forest with like a bit of water on the ground, and like it was also in another sort of plane that they weren't super familiar with. And then adding hallucinations, adding in mirages within the mist, just people thinking that they're seeing creatures, adding actual creatures to the mist.
Right.
So that once they think they saw something and it wasn't, and they start to ignore things that they're seeing, reminding them that sometimes it's still dangerous out there. Finally, adding more color or more flavor to the actual tree itself, which was this giant gnarled oak that had these teardrop shaped objects on them. And inside those teardrops were lost souls. And so evoking the emotions felt by those lost souls that were captured in these teardrops and instilling that into the characters, telling them that like as they're approaching, they are feeling their essentially a sense of heartbreak, or their insecurities are coming out in ways that don't make any sense, and they are just taking on the grief and the confusion of these souls that are lost in this tree, all the while trying to not wake up this giant creature and navigate this strange place. And all of that resulted in the exact vibe that I was going for, which was their primary goal was get what they need and get the hell out. It was not, they were not dawdling. They were not messing around because they were like, we are very clearly in a strange land that we shouldn't be in, and we need this thing, and it's incredibly dangerous. And there's not really another option, but we've got to make it work. And it added a great level of everyone was just on edge. It made everybody nervous, which in the right amounts is what makes it fun to sit at the table and get into all of that.
I think you're getting at something really important there. And I was going to talk about this in a separate episode related to describing scenes and things like that. And this is something that I picked up from, I think Connie Chang made a video about it one time, about breaking things down into the five senses as you're describing scenes. And this is a fantastic tool. Everyone should keep this in their back pocket. But when it comes to what you just described, for instance, you had the water underfoot, like that would feel cold. You had the mist in the forest around you clinging to your skin. You had the sound of the slight breathing of the creature. You had the visual of the teardrop. Kind of going through each of your five senses and thinking to yourself and asking yourself those questions like, what would this sound like? What is the atmosphere like? What does this feel like? Is the air heavy? Is the water cold? That will do so much for you when it comes to describing these sorts of scenes to your players and kind of getting what's in your head out there to them. The five senses are like a really easy starting point when it comes to that sort of thing.
I want to dial in on you alluded to this, but I want to say it very explicitly. Asking those questions to yourself is an incredibly useful tool for just yourself, even not even just for conveying the scene to people, but to answer the questions for your own dang self and to see what shakes out of that. Which is why I said, like, I ask myself questions. What would make this just a little spookier? What would make this just a little more welcoming? What would make this just a little more heinous? And or if I'm taking something that isn't quite there, or I'm like, I had to move a plot point somewhere else, and now it's in like a very different section of the world or a very different part of the story, and like it went from, you know, maybe earlier in the adventure when you were all kind of starry-eyed, but now you're beleaguered and tired, and this thing wouldn't make sense anymore. Reworking that and asking, how can I take this thing? Maybe it was an upbeat, fun merchant that you were going to run into, and now it's like a downtrodden, down on his luck merchant or something like that, or a dead merchant who, you know, whatever it may be. Changing that up and asking yourself the question of like, where are we now? What is the tone that I'm going for? How can I modify this? That is where we're at.
Yeah, keeping yourself on your toes, basically, and adapting to your players, because that is most of the game is collaborative storytelling, not just like you shouting at them what happens. You know, adapting to them makes so much sense, and it's something you should be doing by default.
I am going to do something interesting here, Diana. Are you ready to go on a wild ride with me?
Yeah.
All
right.
We're gonna merge episodes.
Holy shit.
We're gonna reach backwards in time through the audio files and the video files into last episode about stealing, because I would like to talk about stealing and editing the vibe as a method of yoinking, as we previously discussed. You brought up
thievery?
The vibe is thievery. No, so taking a pre-existing thing, and as you said last time with like John Wick, as always.
I watched that again right after we filmed that. Oh my god, dude!
I watched John Wick for the first time last night because of you.
You hadn't seen it?
I hadn't seen it. I'm gonna watch the rest of them now because it was fucking amazing.
Endeavorance, buddy.
But I watched it.
You watched it, and I talked about it for so long, assuming you had fucking seen it. I have been friends with you for so long, assuming you had seen it.
I know these general story beats, which is you killed Keanu Reeves' dog. Now you're gonna die. But I hadn't actually seen it. I've seen the middle 30 minutes of the second movie. But I'm about to go.
The second one's the worst one. Not that
I've heard
it's bad, it's just worse
really
than the rest.
good. Is 4 the best?
4 is the best.
Yeah, I'm super excited if they get better from the first, which was fucking stellar. So I want to talk about taking something and twisting the vibes around and getting something new out of it. So sort of extending on what we were talking about with yoinking. You can take an existing bit of inspiration or wholesale story or concept, maybe change all the names and do a little bit of work so that you're not quite just plagiarizing, but then flip it on its head. As Diana has said before, with taking something like John Wick and inverting it or whatever, you can take a franchise, you can take a well-known story, and you can tell it in a different light. For example, and these are, I think, two things that you have not seen, so I apologize, but
Great, here we go.
I
Fucking strap in. I'm gonna
here's
get
the
roasted
thing.
by our audience.
I put in
Another
the
episode
effort
in
to
a row,
watch
Endeavors.
your movie. All right, and it was fucking great, and I loved it, and you have improved my life because of it. I'm going to talk about The Princess Bride now.
God fucking damn it.
The Princess Bride, a movie that Diana still has not seen,
which was a whole conversation that is restricted to our Gilded World Weavers because we had to cut it out of the episode. So become a Gilded World Weaver today to see me get absolutely fucking obliterated by Endeavors for not having seen a movie that came out in 87.
Okay, but, we're not going to get into this again. But yeah, go to theatlasloom.com and sign up, support the podcast. Thank you so much. I have something in my eye. Somebody rubbing my eye. Anybody who's watching the video version of the podcast right now, please enjoy me rubbing my eye for the next probably 5 minutes.
Yeah. The vibe is going blind.
The vibe is going blind. Welcome to the Atlas Loom, a podcast where we do the same bit on loop forever.
Listen, we never look. The vibe is that we never took improv lessons.
The vibe is that Diana and I will come up with like random slogans, and then we both just start saying it unironically in a matter of hours. It's just an echo chamber. Yeah, it's rough. So Princess Bride. The Princess Bride is it's a comedy, right? Like, it is a lighthearted comedy film. And it's about a woman who fell in love with a man that then went away and presumably died. And the woman gets, I don't know what the term, chosen to become the wife of the land's king, who she does not love, or prince, or whoever. And then her former lover turns out he's not dead and comes and saves her, and big adventure, and meets cast of characters along the way and all that good stuff. Spoiler. It is a very lighthearted adventure involving animated characters who all riff off of each other so very well, but it's all pretty jovial. Even the sort of sad or scary or stern parts are still pretty lighthearted comparatively. And you could take that story and you could make it dark. Ooh. You could make it really dark. Because here's a woman who was in love, who everything in her life was about this guy who went off and, to her knowledge, was murdered by pirates. And then, while she's grieving, is snatched up and chosen to become the forced wife of royalty, who also, spoiler again, since you're probably never going to watch the movie, I assume.
Look, someone actually sent it to me. I have a DVD now. We can watch that instead of John Wick 4 if we want a massive downgrade in our...
Well, we could do both.
Make popcorn.
The other spoiler is, and I'm sorry to anybody who hasn't seen it. If you're listening to this podcast, you've probably seen it. The prince intends to murder her. He intends to use his chosen fiance as a conduit to start a war. He was going to kill her and leave her body dumped on a shore to make it look like another country killed her before the wedding, so that he could start a war with that country. And that's all a pretty good plot line. There's hooks, there's twists, there's secrets, and they just happen to tell it as a comedy, as a enjoyable, lighthearted adventure. Hello, this is post-recording, now editing, beleaguered Endeavorance. I just wanted to pop on and say that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that The Princess Bride is primarily a book and was originally a book and was adapted to a film. And the point of the film is they're reading the book, and the movie is the enactment of the book. Point being, I'm aware it's a book. Don't at me. I call it, I've mostly interacted with the movie, and that's what has a grip on my heart, or my, what is that, Saturn? Anyway, if you're listening to this and not watching this, I'm wearing a space shirt and I'm pointing to Saturn. This is going great. Back to the episode. Bye. But if it's instead you are the guy who they think was murdered by pirates, and now you find out that your former lover is being forced into marriage with the prince of this land. You could probably add in some more stuff there around, the motivation for why you're returning, how you learned about that, so on and so forth. But it's still a cast of characters going on an adventure to save someone and stop a larger plot that they got swept up in.
Uh-huh.
And along the way, there's torture, there's loss, there's murder. Every character in the movie has like their own ulterior motives as well. You've got Inigo Montoya, who is trying to avenge his father, who was killed by one of the people who's in the court involved in conscripting this woman. Like, everyone's sort of intertwined, and it would just make such a good, serious movie too. It would just work. And so you don't even need to come up with your own plot. You can take all those story beats, you can make it darker, and you can run it exactly. And I guarantee nobody would be like, this is just the plot to The Princess Bride. Like,
oh, yeah.
They would,
like
yeah,
we
they
talked
would be
about
like,
last
what?
episode, no one's gonna fucking know that you stole your concept from something else.
And all you've done is change the tone, right?
Yeah,
Like,
you've
all
just
you've
shifted the
done
focus.
is exactly, you've changed the way that the story was told. You didn't change the story, but it does change the story.
No longer a love story, now a story about someone clawing for their freedom.
Yeah.
Wild.
It's about a desperate attempt to free an otherwise condemned and heartbroken person, which is, I think, pretty rad. Another example that I have listed here, and this is much, much less in depth, but Game of Thrones, but make the families incompetent, right? Like, make all the ruling. I mean, like, the show itself, that's kind of how it is. All the ruling families are wackadoo, but you can make it much goofier. Game of Thrones is a very serious show. You could make it super goofy. You could take the intense political dynamics of Game of Thrones, right? It's like the gold standard, if not the gold standard, is the most well-known public fiction that is all about intense politics. But what if they were just goobers and had no idea what they were doing, and they were just completely inept at actually running anything, and all of their attempts at like vying for power failed spectacularly? And that in and of itself was its own issue of, like, maybe you play as some peasants who live in this world and are constantly dealing with this fallout, and now you're like, you know what? Let's liberate this place from all of these ruling families. And your quest is to go essentially usurp all of these complete morons. But like, you're still fighting from a position of David versus Goliath. They still have all the resources and the castles and the armies and whatnot and the money, and you're just some dude. But here we go. So jumping around here a little bit, I do want to go back to the tree with the teardrops. Because I mentioned that it was a foreboding, nerve-wracking sequence. The overall campaign that they were in was not that tone. It was not foreboding. It was not that scary. It was a more of a grand adventure vibe. It was more upbeat. It wasn't explicitly a comedy campaign, but it was not meant to be a super high pressure situation. But just because you're not currently doing it in the overall campaign, the overall world, the overall story, doesn't mean that you can't veer off that path, dabble in some other emotions and other vibes, and then make your way back. And you can even combine them. You can sort of dither your way from one vibe to another. Another great word. Here is a very good example, I think. With that sequence where they were in that sort of alternate plane, foreboding massive monsters, trying to do an extraction of a relic. The reason that they were there was they were searching for the dead son of a dwarven father who hails from the Jansport clan. And their whole thing
hold on a fucking second.
Was
Wait a
they all had backpacks full of tons of equipment.
Oh. Dev, I was looking at your fucking episode notes for this segment, and I was like, what the fuck is the Jansport Saga? The audience, that's literally what he wrote. Three words. The Jansport Saga. Is that what? Oh my god.
It was a clan of dwarves
Uh-huh.
who all carried around like all of their personal possessions in massive backpacks. And they were the Jansport clan. And
Anyway, Jansport, if you're listening,
if you're listening, sponsor
sponsor
us.
us.
So, DeMarco Fastidious Jansport,
Oh my god,
the father
fastidious?
who the father who lost his son, despite being named DeMarco Jansport and
Uh-huh.
having a giant goofy backpack, he was a
Mm-hmm.
grieving father, and I portrayed him as such. And that the juxtaposition of like absurd name, absurd concept, absurd clan, it's tough to pull off sometimes with that stark of a contrast.
Yeah.
But showing like, hey, here's a fun gag. We're playing a game here. We're make believing, and that is inherently absurd. Let's acknowledge that inherent absurdity of what we're doing here and have fun with it. But we're also still compassionate people, and we're here because we all have beating hearts and want to feel things. And DeMarco was a grieving father. He had lost his son. He had no idea where his son was, and he was fearing the worst. And unfortunately for him, the worst did happen. There was a sequence in which we had he found his son's dead body and was mourning it, and ultimately died cradling his son's body. But
His grave
taking
just had the little the little diamond thing that all transport backpacks have with the little like two holes in it.
oh my god, yes,
Jesus.
that's so good. That's so good. I should have done that. But taking your tone and bending it as far as you can to see where it ends up. I loved that. I loved that sequence for me and for the players, because we had been in the grand adventure space for so long, and shaking it up with, while leading them on to believe that this is just another goofy arc by introducing a goofy character, or a character who seems like they should be goofy and then are not goofy. That was my way to segue us from the sort of more lighthearted, goofy tones that we have into grieving father, scary alternate world, finding dead bodies, etc. I kept that little inkling of the original sense of the world with, here's the Jansport clan. Haha, we can always look back at that and remember that that's kind of funny as we're going into this very, very heavy segment. And I think that let me veer us towards the vibe that we were looking for, or that I was looking to portray, without just giving my players complete whiplash.
That does kind of touch on something I wanted to talk about, and that we'll probably talk about more in other episodes of the Atlas Loom, especially when it comes to the more TTRPG. Like, functionally, this is how you run a good game with regards to your world building sort of episodes that we'll have. A little less sexual overtones on those ones. But for right now, it is important to note that the tone of your world should be at least somewhat guided by what your players want out of it. A lot of DMs and GMs just kind of come into things thinking, like, okay, I want to tell a specific story. Like, this is the story I'm going to tell, whether they like it or not. And when you have a big enough pool of players and potential like friends to choose from, where you can put out a call of like, hey, this is the tone of my story. Anyone who wants to join, come in. If you don't have that, if you just have like you and your circle of friends who all are like, oh, I kind of want to play D&D, you should ask them what kind of tone they're looking for out of the story. You should kind of let that guide what you do. If they want a silly campaign, go for it. If they want like absolutely hardcore, like fully serious, dramatic, like NPC deaths, player deaths, things like that, you should know that based on session zero info and things like that, and then kind of use that to guide the tone that you slap onto your world, or at least to that story.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's difficult for players to even know that.
Yeah.
And so digging in and working through that, a lot of, especially first time players, have no idea. They don't even know that there's a notion of different types of campaigns. They just assume, if you've literally never even like heard an actual player or something, you just assume like, okay, so we're gonna hit goblins with swords. Is that's all they're working on. Explaining like, hey, what we're about to do is going to be emotionally taxing or very funny or don't take it too seriously, or take it very seriously because we're going to be doing some sort of, I don't know, very sullen campaign.
Mhm.
But also maybe don't require very serious stuff on somebody's first try.
I wouldn't recommend it unless they know what they're doing and you know what you're doing. That being said, I do like the idea of deviating from the main tone every once in a while. My advice when it comes to something like that, though, is make sure there's not necessarily like a strong divide, but like I mean, I guess story wise, a divide between that like very out of the norm tone to the rest of your story. So, like,
Yes.
if you enter a location that has a slightly different vibe to it, and then making sure your players know when they physically leave that location and come back to the main story, the main plot, that you're back into the serious vibe or whatever vibe you set up for that main story. That locational difference kind of helps because then there's that you're priming them for something different, and then okay, we're coming back to the real thing now. So like literal locational differences, having them travel to a new place and to a new tone is a good way to kind of keep the reins on it a little bit.
That's a perfect segue
Is it?
into what I want to talk about.
Oh, hell yeah.
Amazing. Well done.
Podcasting.
Podcasting. Thank you, Diana. Because I wanted to sort of wrap us up on this subject with hopefully a pretty good list for folks to have as a takeaway.
Oh.
So we've talked about picking your tone. We talked about running your tone, conveying the tone, changing the tone, taking something and flipping its tone. But what about as you're actually fleshing out your world, which is this is a world building podcast, as you're fleshing out your world, the impacts that your tone, your vibe will have on different locations and how those locations vary from each other. So exactly what Diana was just saying with traveling, like making physical distance be a separator to introduce a new vibe.
Mm.
As you're designing your world, you can think through, all right, I'm making a bleak world. What does that mean for the cities? What does that mean? I've got a list here. I'm just going to read them off. What does that mean for the cities, the people, the climate, the history, the politics, and adventure? The cities, what kind of resources do they have? If it's as we've talked about, like a constantly overcast and gloomy kind of vibe, maybe it's built such that they have to have a lot of irrigation. They have to have a lot of ways to get not irrigation, drainage. They have to have everything has to be built around drainage so that they can live at all out of the wet, and everything is just miserable. And maybe what construction materials did they use to build their town because of this? If it's super wacky and jovial, maybe every building is just immaculately different and made out of a different material and nothing matches and it's all super just slapdash. For the people, are they optimistic? Are they sad? Are they depressed? Are they just going through their life and waiting to die? The climate, as we've talked about, if you want to make an oppressive feeling world, how oppressive? Are we talking overcast? Are we talking fog? Are we talking acid rain? Are we talking rain of fire? How oppressive are we talking? Because you can really do a lot with climate. There's so much that we associate with sadness and happiness that are also literally just weathers. Rain, clouds, fog for sadness, confusion, and just sorrow. And then sunshine and a light breeze for happiness and optimism.
Welcome to the Atlas Loom, where we talk about your seasonal depression.
Welcome to the Atlas Loom. Send help in the form of SSRIs.
Can you tell we're filming this in the middle of winter? We're gonna date this. It's it's not great. So please send help.
And then history and politics. What is the history of? Is your world built on blood? Is it war torn, or has it been mostly peace and people just kind of like living with nature and whatnot? And then that also has an impact on what do the cities and people and towns look like. And then finally, adventure, and possibly most importantly, adventure. What quests are out there? What do people need from you? Is it, we need you to go save the entire world? Is it, I can't find my family. I think they've been taken from me. And I also am like now very sickly and simply need closure before I leave this world.
Goodness.
Can you go find evidence of what happened to my family? Like, that's not going to be in an upbeat adventure.
No, at that point you have like 3 days before this sickly Victorian child like dies,
Yep.
and you're just like, well, shit. All right, there goes the
You're the
tone
one that
drops
made it
even
a
further.
Victorian child. All
So
right. I was imagining like old man who just wanted to know what the fate of his family was. You
oh,
made it a Victorian child.
can you tell I run horror campaigns? Yeah, it's all just adaptation. It really, and that is like the crux of world building. And this is also me speaking as a zoology major, like genuinely just, this is the way the world is. How do you adapt your lifestyle to fit that? For those who are new here, we have a segment where we answer your guys' questions related to world building, GMing, storytelling, anything along those lines that you feel like you need help with. Just let us know. Send us an email, wish@theatlasloom.com. That's WISH at theatlasloom.com. We got 2 to go over today. I'm going to read them off. Dev, you're gonna use your brain power here. And don't forget the sexual overtones.
Will do.
All right, so our first wish today comes from Nehemia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, please forgive me and submit all your grievances to Diana can't pronounce names for shit at theatlasloop.com.
Hold on, let me go make the email address.
Nehemia says, I'm curious on how you can implement lunar/solar/planetary cycles in a world. The world that they're building has 2 large moons whose phases influence pretty much everything, holidays, etc. They ask, are there other ways that you would use these cycles to make the world more dynamic?
Yes.
Great. So our second question today.
So multiple moons is immediately fun because if you think about the effect that the moon has on, for example, tides, having multiple moons would be pretty chaos vis-a-vis tides. Having moments where there are potential disasters because the moons are aligning in such a way that it brings a massive tsunami or something your way, and that's just like a thing that astronomers now track, and they have, every 150 years this thing happens and it is a devastating thing, and they're trying to figure out where it's going to hit, when it's going to hit. That's an entire story right there. Maybe trying to prevent that from happening. Also, we're talking about celestial bodies. They could be under the control of gods, and they could be influencing the world by way of just proximity. So having all these things sort of around your world, placing them there, the celestial bodies don't have to just follow like physics or whatnot. Like they can have magical impacts as well.
Oh, yeah. In my world, I make it so that the way that the moons interact with each other or are, an eclipsed moon and things like that, just a new moon, basically. I don't know why I said eclipsed moon, but it sounds cooler. Has to do with the way that the gods are at war with each other, the god of darkness versus the god of the moon and moonlight and things like that. And so that causes certain events. You can make it so lunar cycles are tied to gateways between the planes. You can make it so that they're tied to different monsters' strengths. So there's actually a source book that I was gifted from Mana Project Studios. It's called Nightfell, and it's like a 5e compatible module that introduces exactly that, like a fuck ton of lunar-based storylines, creatures, magic systems, things like that, where the phase of the moon that you're born in determines your abilities. And then in turn, every monster in the world is linked to a certain moon phase, and they have new abilities unlocked if the moons happen to be in that phase. You can do the same with pretty much anything. The idea of the planets aligning or cosmology aligning in a certain way that thins the barriers between worlds is really easy to kind of turn into a story plot line. Generally, you can make it influence the world however you want. I would just caution when it comes to the sun. The sun is really hard to fuck with. You can't have like 2 suns, I don't think.
Don't fuck
right?
with the sun.
Don't fuck with the sun, guys. Leave the sun alone.
That's merch right there. Don't
leave
fuck
the
with
sun
the sun
alone.
No, don't fuck with the sun.
Hashtag don't fuck with the sun. But like you can't have 2 suns on a world, right? Because the fucking I mean, I guess if it works in the way it does in the real world, cycles
definitely
work, right?
can. You can also have like a binary star, which is rad.
A what?
A binary star? It's when it's 2 stars that are in close orbit of each other and just spiral around each other, but they essentially count as a single star.
Oh,
in terms of
cool.
like gravitational force.
That's awesome. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, that's a thing, and it's one of the coolest like celestial events, basically.
Fucking love nerds.
Nerds are great. Another really interesting thing that you can do is just like take existing concepts and change the vibes.
Yoink.
eclipses are usually a rare event. They are usually something that is meaningful. If you wanted to make it tied to, as Diana was alluding or talking about, like having creatures tied to the sun or whatever, they did it in Avatar. When there's a solar eclipse, the firebenders lose their ability to use fire. Uh,
Whoa, really?
yeah, that's like the whole thing.
Oh, I
Same with
haven't
the
seen
moon and
Avatar either.
waterbenders. Well, you should fix that.
Jeez.
Um, in a very wonderful game, and I'm just going to go ahead and give a flat plug shout out because the guy that makes this game is great. The game itself is very, very great. It's called Eastshade, and it is a non-violent RPG where you are a painter solving the world's
Oh,
problems by essentially taking screenshots because the game is like ludicrously pretty, and you walk around with an easel and like make paintings of landscapes to make people happy. But in the game, they have a concept that every day at noon there is a total solar eclipse,
whoa.
and that is just a part of their life. That is just a normal happenstance. And so every day when you're walking around midday, it goes dark for a little while, and there are things that you like need to do during the eclipse. There are things that only appear for moments during the eclipse. There are
Ooh.
there's artwork that you need to get specifically. Like somebody might say, I want to see this cliffside in the light of the eclipse because that's when I met my true love and I want that memory to last with me forever. And so you need to go and find that cliffside and like time it such that you can get a shot of it during the eclipse or something like that, where you have a routine, significant celestial impact on the world that changes everything,
Yeah.
even if it's only momentary.
Timing, I guess. If your players aren't good with timing, be wary of that. But it's a cadence that is set for your world, and all you have to do is just attach some things to that cadence. This next one comes from Aeondar, who says that we can also call him Aeon for short, if easier. The question asks, how can someone at any stage in their world building career create nations and kingdoms that truly feel alive, or at the very least feel genuine? What processes might there be to help this feel more natural when making them? The only thing I would advise when it comes to things like kingdom scale and nation scale things is try not to make every single kingdom and every single nation the exact same. Like just being stuck in like the exact same tone, kind of like we were talking about earlier. Different locations have different aspects to them, different climates that will impact how people live and operate in those locations, which will impact the tone, things like that. Trying to make different nations and kingdoms distinct from each other is a fucking task.
Mm-hmm.
I suck at it. All of my kingdoms in my world are pretty much the exact same, but to circumvent that on your end, and it'll take some work, is to kind of dive into like what their motivations are as a nation, as a kingdom, what politically, who runs the place, what type of government system do they have? Is it a monarchy, oligarchy, is it religious based, is it familial, anything like that? How are their interactions with neighboring kingdoms, neighboring nations? How do different geographical parts of the landmass that they control impact their relationships with their neighbors? What are their current goals? Kind of like think of it as you would a NPC. What are its goals? What are its relationships? What does it want? What does it look like? What does it want to accomplish? I don't know. Anything like that. Just try and sit down, ask yourself questions. That's a gist of all of the all of our answers today is ask yourself questions and try and make it distinct from each other so that way that there's a different feel when your characters go from one kingdom to another. Otherwise, it won't make it. You may as well just have everything in the same spot,
I think it's critically important to dial home the making it different. I think if you want to talk about making believable and genuine nations and kingdoms, what causes nations and kingdoms to be separate? Typically, it is a difference in culture, a disagreement in how society should be structured, or some other significant barrier that makes it so that either, if it's not the people that don't mesh, it's the leadership that doesn't mesh. Maybe there's a kingdom that's got a conqueror as their leader, and another I wouldn't even call it a kingdom, but the polar opposite, a like tribal land that is being attacked by the conqueror who wants to take it over. Those are radically different political structures, motivations, cultures. It really comes down to you have to nail that cultural difference. Not every single country in the real world is super radically culturally different, but a lot of them are. And if you're building a world and for the sake of practicality, for making it feel alive and distinct, answering the question of how do these people live? What differentiates this populace? Are they communal in living? Are they super individualistic? Are they material? Are they immaterial? Are they pious? Are they not? The notion that, unilaterally, like, we are great, they are barbaric. That rhetoric is what causes these big divides. And so how is that being portrayed in your world? Or, in my opinion, more interestingly, how does your world not have that? Because not every world needs to be steeped in strife and hatred.
Yeah. Fucking illithid colonies all have the same sort of, every single person in those colonies has the exact same vibe due to a governing, well, I mean, in this case, a literal hive mind, but like, they all believe very strongly in this one thing. That's just how it is, Honestly, illithids, they're the real utopia.
I heard elephants for a second there. I know that's not what I know. You said
too.
illithids, but elephants
I gotta
are
start saying
peak
mind flayer.
society.
I don't know when I got so pretentious that I started actually using the word illithid, but goddamn, I need to stop.
That is going to do it for our wishes today. As always, if you would like to send us a wish, if you have a question, a comment, you're stuck on something, we would love to help you. Send us a wish at theatlasloom.com. That is wish at theatlasloom.com. You can also head to theatlasloom.com, where you can sign up to get new episodes emailed directly to you right as they drop, or you can sign up to become a Gilded World Weaver. You can support the show, and we would very much appreciate your support. Thank you so much for everyone who already has. And you get access to a bunch of wonderful bonus content. A new episode of bonus content just went out right before we started recording this.
I made it,
I think it's pretty funny.
Midnight. I was editing it. It's so good. It's so funny. Please watch it. I just want somebody to see it. Validate me.
I saw it. Am I
The
not good
vibes
enough?
are desperate for approval. If you're curious to know more about us as people beyond the Atlas Loom, as TTRPG content creators in general, just generally swell folk, you can find either of us individually on all forms of social media. I am Diana Faye, better known as Diana of the Rose, literally everywhere, mostly on TikTok, on Twitch, and whatnot, talking about a lot of D&D. I'm a D&D girly, but also just anything, whatever I feel like. And then Endeavorance here has his own stuff. He's got his own fancy website, don't ya?
I have a website, yeah. Endeavorance.camp. You can find everything that I do there. Use your favorite web browsing application on your favorite hardware device that is capable of running web browsing. This is going great. You can also find me as Endeavorance on TikTok. You can find me as Endeavorance TV on Twitch. I'm mad about that. But if you want to make it easy, just head to Endeavorance.camp. All my stuff is there. I also will say, a slight self-plug, I have started a new section on my website for aspiring creators where I am compiling and uploading my notes as I learn how to do things. So I've got an article up there about my recording and editing process, as well as an article about my streaming setup, my audio video streaming setup. So I link directly to all the products that I use. I explain the hardships that I ran into, the notes that I had to struggle to learn, and I'm hoping that this will help anyone else who is interested. It's completely free. I'm not going to put it behind a paywall ever. Knowledge like this should not be hidden. Rising tides and all that. So
we love creators helping other creators. Thank you so much for listening to the Atlas Loom. Our paths will cross again soon, but in the meantime, keep on weaving your worlds, and we will see you all in the next episode. Can we get back to the sexual overtones?